She married a stranger for money. He paid for a wife he didn't want. They agreed no love, no questions, just 1 year. But fate doesn't read contracts. Now, 6 months later, she's working at his company under her real name. He doesn't recognize her, and she doesn't know if she wants him to. But when a scandal explodes and someone tries to destroy her reputation, he steps forward, not as her boss, not as her husband, but as something much more dangerous. A man who might finally care. Who is Mira Collins? Really? Why did Graham Halston choose her, of all people, for his secret arrangement? And when the truth comes out about the contract, the charity, and everything in between, will he still stand by her, or walk away like everyone else? This is a story about secrets you can't outrun, love you can't fake, and the moment you realize someone's silence might mean they're protecting you. If you're ready for a story full of tension, slow-burning attraction, and a twist you didn't see coming, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Because this time, the fake marriage isn't the lie. It's everything else that is. Let's begin. At just 29 years old, Mira Collins had already forgotten what peace sounded like. Her one-room flat, tucked inside a fading tenement block in Hartford, Connecticut, echoed not with laughter or music, but with the quiet hum of loneliness and a fan that never stopped creaking. Outside her window, life carried on. Cars passed, people hurried, but Mira's world had stalled. On the other side of the city, in a sterile hospital room filled with blinking monitors and antiseptic air, her mother, Judith Collins, lay barely conscious, her failing heart dragging closer to silence each day. The doctors had stopped using gentle words. They said that without a complex procedure costing close to $270,000, Judith wouldn't live past spring. Mira sat curled on her second-hand couch, one leg tucked beneath her, staring at her cracked phone screen. Job listings scrolled endlessly. None came close to the number she needed. The room around her smelled faintly of dust and damp wallpaper, and the quiet was too loud to bear. Her reflection in the blackened TV screen startled her. Dark circles hollowed her eyes. Her lips were pale, and her auburn hair hung limply from a frayed ponytail. The wool sweater hugging her shoulders still held the scent of the hospital waiting room. Then she did something she had told herself she wouldn't do. She opened the bookmarked link she had avoided for almost a week. An anonymous post. A wealthy man seeking a wife not in love, but in legality. No expectations. No intimacy. Just a marriage on paper. In return, a lump sum. Enough to rewrite a fate. Mira didn't believe in fairy tales, but she believed in her mother's breath, and she was running out of time. That same afternoon, under a gray sky and the threat of rain, Mira rode a city bus toward downtown. She didn't remember the scenery. Her thoughts were too loud, her heartbeat too fast. The cafe was small and smelled of burnt toast and overused espresso grounds. She spotted him before she even stepped inside. Graham Mercer. Late 30s, tall, not unkind in the face, but unreadable. His clothes were pressed, his hair perfectly in place. He didn't belong in a place like this, surrounded by cracked linoleum and chipped mugs. He looked like someone who lived above weather and worry. Mira approached with a cautious breath. "I'm Mira." He nodded once. No smile, no welcome. Just business. He spoke plainly. His mother, Lucille, was gravely ill and refused medical intervention unless Graham proved he wasn't alone. The image of a wife mattered more than the truth. So he needed someone. Temporarily. Discreetly. He promised the money would be transferred the same day she signed. 1 year, he said. Then it's over. Quietly. Mira looked down at her hands. She had once imagined marriage as something tender, but tenderness didn't pay hospital bills. She thought of her mother's soft voice, now barely above a whisper, asking her to go home and rest, of the beeping machines, of the way hope had started slipping out the window, and so she said yes, quietly. Graham placed a folded contract on the table. She didn't read it. She just picked up the pen. 10 minutes later, they stood side by side in a municipal building that smelled of bleach and old paper. A clerk, barely paying attention, stamped the form. And just like that, Mira Collins became Mira Mercer. She walked home alone in the fading light, the city stretching around her like a stranger. The check sat in her coat pocket, heavy and real. She pressed her palm to it as if it might warm her. At home. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood by the window, staring out at the streetlight blinking in the dusk. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the one she had bargained for. Because when someone you love is dying, you don't ask what it will cost. You ask how fast you can pay. Mira sat alone in the silence of her apartment, the check resting in her lap like both a promise and a punishment. The ink was still fresh, but it felt heavier than paper had any right to be. That money would save her mother. No question. But the cost. That part hadn't quite taken shape yet. She thought of Graham Mercer, the man in the cafe, how he had spoken without looking her in the eye, how he hadn't even asked for her last name. He had written a number, not a story. Who was this man, really? Someone who could trade hundreds of thousands for convenience like it meant nothing. A name with a cold suit and colder eyes. Mira folded the check and shoved it into a drawer, slamming it shut as if it could quiet her thoughts. She wrapped herself in her coat and hurried down the stairs, into the wind. She needed to see her mother. She needed to remember why she had said yes. The hospital was a labyrinth of white lights and sterile echoes. The smell of antiseptic curled in her nose, sharp and unforgiving. Mira found her mother's room and stepped inside quietly. Judith looked impossibly small, her body swallowed by the stiff hospital bedding. Machines hummed steadily, their blinking lights casting soft shadows over her sunken cheeks. Mira slipped into the chair beside the bed, her chest tightening. She reached for her mother's hand bones, so light beneath soft skin, and tears fell before she could stop them. Judith stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze found Mira's face, and she smiled, faint and slow. "Why are you crying, sweetheart?" she whispered, her voice no stronger than a sigh. Mira forced a smile, brushing the tears away with the back of her hand. Just tired. Long day at work. She couldn't say it. Couldn't tell her mother that she had just bound herself to a stranger for the price of a life. This bed, those machines, this fragile hope they had been bought. And Mira was the currency. Judith squeezed her hand softly. "Then rest. My love. You've done enough." But Mira knew rest wouldn't come. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. As her mother slipped back into sleep, Mira sat still, the weight in her chest growing. Somewhere deep in her bag, folded and official, was a marriage certificate, an invisible chain. Graham had said it was simple, just business. But as Mira watched the slow rhythm of her mother's breathing, she felt the sharp edge of something far more complicated. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. The money was real. The papers were signed. But now her life had been tied, tightly and legally, to someone she did not know, someone she might never understand. When a nurse came in to dim the lights, Mira stood and left quietly. The walk home was cold, the streets slick with leftover rain, city lights blurred through her tears, and everything around her seemed too loud, too fast. Back in the apartment, she leaned on the window frame, staring at the skyline cloaked in shadow. She whispered it aloud this time, not to convince herself, but to remember this was for Mom. I had no choice. But even as the words left her mouth, A deeper truth clung to her ribs. She was terrified of what this choice might take from her. Not just now, but long after the year ended. 2 weeks passed. Mira woke to the sharp buzz of her phone dancing across the chipped wood of her nightstand. Pale morning light slipped through the warped blinds. She sat up slowly, her body aching with something more than exhaustion. The check had cleared. Every cent. Her mother's surgery was scheduled for the next morning. For the first time in what felt like years, a flicker of hope stirred in her chest, but it came tangled with restlessness. This couldn't be her ending, just handing herself over to someone else's plan. She wanted more. She needed more. Later that day, Mira sat at her mother's bedside again. The room hummed with steady machine beeps. Judith looked better, her face a touch warmer. The blue faded from her lips. A nurse popped in and confirmed the surgery would proceed as planned. Mira squeezed her mother's hand, feeling something like joy trying to surface. When Judith woke briefly, her voice was rough with sleep. "You found the money?" she asked gently, not accusing, just amazed. Mira smiled. "Yeah, I got lucky, picked up some freelance work." She hated the lie, but the truth was too sharp to speak aloud. Her mother nodded, too tired to ask more. Mira sat back and watched her drift off, knowing the worst might soon be behind them. But another storm, one she hadn't planned for, was already rising. Mira told her mother it was a freelance writing gig, something that paid well and came just in time. The lie slipped out easily, like she had practiced it. Judith was too weary to question it. She simply nodded, her eyes already drifting closed again. Back at her apartment, Mira opened her laptop and scrolled through more job listings. She had once dreamed of finishing college, but after a single semester at a small state school, the money ran dry. That dream had withered quietly, like so many others. Her resume was threadbare, a string of forgettable jobs in diners, gas stations, and overnight shifts at 24-hour laundromats. Nothing that screamed potential, nothing that impressed anyone. And then she saw it. An opening for a management trainee position at a towering tech corporation called Halston Dynamics, a name that sounded more like a skyline than a company. The post required a degree, something Mira didn't have. But something about it made her pause. The name Halston sparked a memory. The marriage contract. Graham Halston. She had no idea what role he held at the company. For all she knew, he was just another rich man with family wealth. But on instinct more than logic, she clicked, apply. She wrote a cover letter that wasn't polished, but real one that spoke of grit, long nights, and learning fast because she had no other choice. She pressed send with a quiet kind of hope, not desperation, just a wish. A few days later, her phone buzzed. A woman named Henrietta Halston was on the other end. Her voice was firm but warm, like someone who had seen a lot and had no time for nonsense. She said she had read Mira's application and would like to meet her in person. Mira froze. She checked the name again, Henrietta Halston. She hadn't expected anything, let alone this. That Friday, she rode the bus to Halston Dynamics, a steel and glass skyscraper that stabbed the sky like it belonged there. Inside, the air buzzed with confidence. Everyone wore tailored clothes and carried themselves like they were going somewhere fast. Mira's sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor as she stepped up to the front desk. Her jacket was old and her jeans a little frayed, but she stood tall. A young assistant led her up to the 30th floor. There, in an office flooded with morning light, sat Henrietta, small, composed, hair pinned in place like silver silk. She wore a navy suit, a single pearl necklace, and eyes that missed nothing. "Sit," she said with a half smile. "I like your honesty. We need more people who've lived outside of ivory towers." Mira blinked, unsure if it was real. Henrietta went on. She said the company had plenty of people with polished degrees and perfect shoes. What they needed were people who saw problems before they exploded. People with something to prove. I was an underdog too, Henrietta said. Let's see how far you can run. And just like that, she offered Mira the role, a full-time trainee. Starting the following Monday, Mira left the office in a daze, gripping the elevator rail like it might float away. She had no idea that Henrietta was Graham's grandmother, a woman who pulled strings so subtly, even the puppets never noticed. That first day at Halston Dynamics came like a whirlwind. Mira arrived early, her hands clutching a notebook from the dollar store and a pen that kept leaking in her pocket. The other trainees had crisp blazers and alumni rings. They spoke in acronyms and buzzwords. Mira felt their eyes skim past her like she didn't belong. Her supervisor was a woman named Tessa Langley, tall, elegant, and cold in a practiced way. She handed Mira a stack of tedious reports and data tasks with a smile too sharp to be kind. Another trainee, Brent Callahan, leaned in and muttered, "We needed diversity, I guess," before walking away with a smirk. Mira didn't flinch. She worked, quietly, carefully. Every day, she stayed late, retracing spreadsheets, learning the company's systems like a language no one had time to teach her. Then she started noticing patterns, places where numbers didn't match, where time vanished between clicks. She wrote a report, outlining what she saw, not just what was broken, but how to fix it. And she left it on Tessa's desk without a note. The next morning, Tessa called her in. Her face was tight, unreadable. "Your report's been forwarded," she said flatly. It had merit. Mira felt a flicker of pride in her chest, but Tessa quickly added, "Don't get ahead of yourself. You're still very new." Mira nodded, but inside, something steadied. She still didn't realize the report had gone further past Tessa, up the ladder, that it now sat on Graham's desk, marked with her name, the man she had married, the man she didn't yet know. There were moments when Mira caught sight of him, Graham Halston, moving through the office like he belonged to another world. His suits were tailored, his steps precise, his expression unreadable. He rarely spoke to trainees. His eyes were always locked on his phone, his mind somewhere beyond the glass walls and digital clocks. Mira watched him from across the room sometimes, a quiet fascination blooming in her chest. There was something about his silence that drew her in, controlled, self-contained, like a man carrying too much and showing none of it. She had no idea that he was the same man from the coffee shop, the one who had signed her name beside his, the one who had changed her life with a single check. Graham, for his part, barely noticed the woman with tired eyes and a stubborn jawline typing away at her desk. His days were filled with back-to-back meetings, business deals, and boardroom battles. The impulsive marriage had slipped to the back of his mind, shelved as just another transactional necessity. But while Graham was distracted by the weight of empire, a different storm was taking shape just a few floors down. Tessa Langley had begun to notice how Mira worked, how she stayed late, how she asked questions no one else thought to ask. She didn't like it. And neither did Brent Callahan. It started small. One evening, Mira found her company-issued pen missing. The next day, Brent waved it in the air, laughing as he accused her of stealing. Tessa stood beside him, her voice crisp and loud as she backed him up. "We can't afford dishonesty here." Mira's face burned. She denied it. But in the cold murmur of the break room, words like thief and dropout began to cling to her like lint she couldn't shake off. She thought of her mother, resting at home now, healing. She couldn't walk away. Not now. So she did the only thing she could. She worked harder. She volunteered for every project no one else wanted. She stayed past closing, her fingers aching as she learned the company's complex software systems on her own. While others left for happy hour, Mira stayed, building skills no one had taught her. Then one night, as she was gathering her things beneath the flicker of an overhead light, Henrietta Halston appeared. "I've been watching you," Henrietta said, setting a mug of tea on Mira's desk. "And I like what I see." Mira blinked, unsure how to respond, but Henrietta continued. "Keep going. You're stronger than you look, and smarter than you let on." Those words lit a quiet fire inside Mira, a reminder that she had not made it this far just to survive. She wanted to matter. By the end of her first month, Mira earned her first small win. One of her process suggestions saved the team hours of work. Tessa acknowledged it with clenched teeth. Brent said nothing. The smirk he wore so easily had disappeared. That evening, Mira walked home through the chilly streets of Hartford, her hands deep in her coat pockets, the wind slicing past. For the first time in a long time, she felt something stir. Not confidence, not yet, but a sense of direction. She thought of Graham. She didn't know him. Not really. But she wondered what he would say if he knew the full truth who she was, what she had done, and why. She had no idea that their lives had already been woven together by a signature and a date neither of them remembered clearly. 3 months passed. On a Thursday afternoon, Mira adjusted her blouse and stepped into a sleek conference room on the 32nd floor. She had found her rhythm now. Days that once felt overwhelming now passed with a steady pulse of work, learning, and quiet persistence. The office buzzed with energy phones ringing, keyboards clacking, ideas flying fast between glass partitions. Mira liked the movement, the momentum. It made her feel like she belonged to something larger than herself. But today was different. A corporate mixer was scheduled for that evening, a cocktail party for executives and selected staff. Mira had heard rumors that Graham would attend. She tried not to dwell on it. At her desk, she focused on clearing her inbox, her fingers quick and precise. Then, without warning, Tessa appeared, dropping a stack of reports onto Mira's desk. "These need to be done before noon," she said, her voice clipped. Mira nodded, already reaching for the first file. Brent hovered nearby, muttering under his breath, teacher's favorite, before walking off with his usual smug grin. But Mira had learned something in those months. Silence was not surrender. It was strength held in reserve. She lowered her head and got to work, letting her efforts speak louder than the noise around her. By late afternoon, Mira had caught up on the stack of reports Tessa had dumped on her desk. Not only that she had spotted a minor error in a summary Tessa had signed off on, quietly, she corrected it. The satisfaction was small but sharp, and she let it sit privately inside her chest like a lit match she didn't dare flaunt. That evening, Halston Dynamics hosted a cocktail mixer at a rooftop venue in the heart of the city. The skyline of Hartford shimmered below like a galaxy turned upside down. Mira arrived in a black dress she had borrowed from a second-hand shop 3 blocks from her apartment. The hem was slightly uneven, but it was the nicest thing she owned. Around her, champagne flowed and conversations sparkled like glass. Men in pressed suits, women in heels that clicked confidence across marble. Mira felt like a whisper in a ballroom, but she kept her chin up and helped herself to a glass of water. Then he walked in. Graham. Everything about him shifted the room, the weight of his steps, the quiet power in how people parted around him. His charcoal suit hugged his frame like a second skin. He smiled at no one in particular, speaking in low tones to a cluster of senior staff. Mira didn't expect him to look her way, but for a flicker of a moment, their eyes met, and something in her chest caught. She told herself it was nothing, just nerves. But later, as she stood near a table at the far end of the room. He approached. "How are you finding the work?" he asked. His tone was casual, but his gaze was steady. Mira stammered a little. "It's challenging, but I like that." He gave a small nod, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded shawl. "It gets cold up here," he said simply, offering it to her. Their fingers brushed. Just for a second. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure whether she was blushing from warmth or surprise. He nodded once more, then turned and disappeared back into the crowd. She clutched the shawl tighter than she meant to. That weekend, something stirred in her, a need to give something back, something real. She spent half a Saturday in her cramped kitchen frying her mother's favorite honey butter chicken, something rich and comforting. On Monday morning, she placed the food in a clean container and left it quietly on Graham's desk. No card, just a small sticky note. "Thank you for the shawl, but peace, as always, was temporary." Later that week, Tessa called Mira into her office. Her face was tight with anger, and in her hands was a project proposal, Mira's proposal. Tessa accused her of plagiarism. Brent stood by the door, arms crossed, claiming he had seen Mira snooping around Tessa's desk. Mira's chest hollowed. She knew exactly what was happening. "I wrote that from scratch," she said calmly. "It's based on archived reports and public data." Tessa scoffed, but Mira didn't falter. She opened her laptop, pulled up the document's metadata and email timestamps, all of which showed she had sent versions of the proposal directly to Graham each night for feedback. Tessa's expression faltered. She had no reply. Later, Graham reviewed the situation quietly. When he stopped by Mira's desk the next day, all he said was, "Good work," before moving on. Tessa's fury deepened. A week later, an important opportunity emerged. The company needed a small team to negotiate a high-stakes deal with a demanding tech supplier from Austin. It would be worth tens of millions. Mira volunteered. The meeting took place at a dark, upscale steakhouse. The client, a gruff man named Harold, liked to talk business over bourbon. Graham made it clear he couldn't drink due to a health condition. So when Harold raised a glass and expected everyone to follow, Mira reached for Graham's untouched drink and downed it without blinking. The table went silent. Then Harold roared with laughter. "I like her," he said, thumping the table. 3 drinks later, the deal was sealed with a handshake, but Mira's head spun. Her words began to slur softly. As they left, Graham noticed the sway in her steps. "Where do you live?" he asked, reaching for his keys. She blinked at him. I don't remember." He sighed, guiding her gently to his car. That night, he drove her not to a hotel, but to his penthouse, an elegant, minimal space bathed in soft gold light from the city beyond its floor-to-ceiling windows. Mira stumbled inside and collapsed onto the nearest couch. Her breath was slow and uneven. She mumbled something, words blurred by bourbon and memory. Graham. The name. The contract. The cafe. She reached for him, fingers brushing the side of his face, her voice barely audible. "You're the one who saved her." He froze, startled by the touch. Her arms looped loosely around his neck. Her breath tickled his cheek, and for one suspended moment, he didn't move. She leaned in, her breath warm against his skin, and for the briefest of moments, her lips grazed the edge of his jaw. Graham's resolve faltered. He could have stepped away. Should have. But something in the way Mira clung to him, not in desire, but in fragile trust, held him still. Not as a man tempted, but as a man moved. Then quietly, almost reverently, he guided her back to the couch. He pulled the curtains shut, letting the city lights slip away. The room dimmed. The night softened. Mira was already fading into sleep. Unaware of how close they'd come to crossing a threshold neither of them had fully understood. When morning arrived, it did so without apology. Pale sunlight cut across the penthouse floor, sharp and uninvited. Mira stirred, her eyes blinking open against the unfamiliar ceiling. She was wearing a shirt far too large his. Her dress lay neatly folded beside her. Panic flared. She sat up too fast, her thoughts jumbled, the remnants of bourbon still fogging her memory. She padded toward the kitchen, where Graham stood quietly with a mug of coffee in hand, his usual suit replaced by a soft gray sweater. She stopped in the doorway. "What happened?" she asked, her voice rough, uncertain. He looked at her, calm and steady. "You were too drunk to go home. I brought you here. You slept on the couch. That's all?" Relief washed through her, shaky and incomplete. She remembered reaching for him, the sound of his voice, the quiet pulse of closeness, but said nothing. He drove her home without a word. The city was just beginning to wake, commuters drifting like ghosts in the early light. Mira stared out the window, her hands knotted in her lap. When they pulled up outside her building, she whispered, "Thank you," and slipped out. Graham sat still behind the wheel long after she disappeared through the door. Back in his apartment, he stood at the window, coffee forgotten, her voice still in his ears. Mira's presence lingered like the echo of a song, soft but haunting. She unsettled him, in ways he couldn't name. He had built his life on boundaries, distance, walls, but she had walked through them like they weren't even there. In her apartment, Mira collapsed onto her bed, still wearing his shirt. It smelled faintly of his cologne, something clean and earthy. She curled into herself, unsure whether the ache in her chest was regret, longing, or confusion. She didn't know what last night meant, only that it meant something. Work didn't wait, but neither did gossip. Tessa and Brent, now visibly irritated by Mira's growing presence, found a new weapon rumors. Quiet at first, then sharp. In the break room, Mira heard them clearly that she had gotten too close to the boss, that she was trading charm for promotions. Mira didn't flinch, not this time. She walked up to them, looked Tessa in the eye, and said, "You can lie to them, but don't lie to yourself." Tessa only smiled. They believe what they want. That's the game. Mira turned away, her hands clenched, but her spine unbent. She buried herself in tasks, working late, meeting deadlines no one expected her to reach. She let her focus speak for her, and Graham noticed. He called her into his office one afternoon. His tone was neutral, but something in his eyes had changed. "Your work," he said, tapping her report, "is consistently strong. You've got a future here." She nodded, a quiet thank you forming on her lips, but her heart thundered. His nearness, his attention, it rattled her. She left the room quickly, afraid of what she might say if she stayed. That night, Graham sat alone in his office. The skyline was dark and glittering. He pulled a file from the drawer, Mira Collins. He read her name slowly. Something about it tugged at him. A memory just beyond reach. The cafe, the paper. The day that changed both of their lives. She's just a trainee, he told himself. But he didn't believe it. And across the city, Mira lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his words circling her thoughts. He had praised her. Not kindly, but sincerely. And it mattered more than it should have. Maybe too much. She wondered if she was just a passing face to him or something more. 6 months in, she had made her mark at Halston Dynamics. Her shoes clicked with quiet confidence now. Colleagues who once whispered now nodded as she passed. She had earned that space, every inch of it. And yet, the sting of resentment from Tessa and Brent hadn't faded. It lived on in side-eyes and forced smiles. But Mira no longer shrank from it. She had bigger things on her mind, like the upcoming tech summit she'd been asked to co-lead. It wasn't a promotion, but it was a sign that maybe she belonged. The summit was Mira's chance to step out of the shadows, and she knew it. At her desk, the table was scattered with notes, diagrams, and sketches in the margins of a worn notebook. She studied the agenda again, tweaking the order, tightening transitions. Across the room, others bustled with preparations, but Mira moved with quiet focus. This was her shot, and she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. Graham Halston, the man she once only saw in passing, had begun taking a more active interest in her work. Since that strange night at his penthouse, his presence had shifted. He kept his distance, yes, but his words came with more warmth. Last week, he had stopped at her cubicle briefly, scanning her latest report before saying, "This is good. Presentable to the board." Mira had flushed, her voice barely above a whisper as she thanked him. She felt it then, a pull she couldn't name, but she buried it. She had work to do. What she didn't know was that outside the polished glass of Halston dynamics, trouble had begun to stir. Graham rarely spoke of his family. Not out of shame, but necessity. His father, Richard Halston, had built the company decades ago, but his personal life had always been chaotic. Years ago, Richard had a child out of wedlock, a boy named Landon, and the family had never recovered. Graham cut ties at 18, determined to build his own name. Landon, on the other hand, stayed close, nursing his bitterness like an inheritance. Now, with Richard frail and nearing the edge of his life, Landon saw his opportunity, the will named Graham as sole heir. That night, Landon slipped into Richard's estate under the guise of a visit and replaced his father's heart medication with something far more dangerous. Mira stumbled into this storm without knowing. She had been sent to a luxury hotel downtown to pick up promotional materials for the summit. As she waited in the lobby, scrolling absently on her phone, a familiar voice caught her ear, sharp, low, deliberate. Landon. He sat in a corner booth with another man, speaking in coded tones. But Mira picked up enough to chill her blood. Mentions of pills, a new version of the will. "He'll be gone by next week," Landon said, laughing under his breath. Mira's pulse surged. She ducked behind a tall ficus plant and fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking as she texted Graham, "There's something wrong. You need to come. It's urgent." The message buzzed on Graham's phone during a late boardroom meeting. He stood, excused himself without a word, and dialed her back. Mira whispered what she had overheard, voice trembling. "Stay where you are," Graham said. Then he was gone, cutting through the city like a blade. He had long suspected Landon's ambition, even hired a private investigator months earlier. And now it was all clicking into place, the financial moves, the chemical purchases flagged by his team, everything lining up with Mira's call. He found her standing near the elevators, pale but steady. "That booth," she said, pointing. It was empty now. Landon had vanished. Without a word, Graham took her hand and pulled her with him. They drove through the night, headlights casting long shadows as they raced toward Richard's mansion. Inside, they found Richard slumped in his chair, breath shallow, skin clammy. Graham dropped to his knees, checked for a pulse, and called for help. Paramedics arrived swiftly, working through the night. Richard was stabilized, the poison traced just in time. Mira stood at the edge of the hospital corridor as the chaos unfolded, uncertain where she belonged in any of it. Graham didn't say much. He sat beside his father's bed, jaw set tight. his expression unreadable. When Richard finally opened his eyes, he reached for Graham's hand and whispered something Mira couldn't hear. Graham nodded slowly but said nothing. Mira saw the grief pressed behind his stillness and quietly stepped out, giving him space. The next day, back at the office, things moved as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted. Graham handed her the summit keynote, the presentation that would open the entire event. It wasn't just a promotion, it was trust, and she would not take it lightly. Mira spent her evenings in the quiet corners of Halston Dynamics, polishing her keynote slides and whispering through lines long after the rest of the building had gone dark. This wasn't just a project anymore. It was a turning point. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, Henrietta Halston appeared unannounced. She stood in the back of the presentation room, arms folded, watching Mira's dry run with sharp eyes and a slight smile. When the final slide faded to black, Henrietta clapped once, then again, her smile widening. "You remind me of my grandson," she said softly, "back when he still believed in building things more than defending them." Mira flushed, the praise sinking deep into her ribs like warmth on a cold morning. That spark pushed her further. On the side, she had started a quiet initiative, collecting winter coats, gently used books, and school supplies for underserved children in rural Kentucky. She called it The Little Lift, and what began as a side project soon gained traction. Word spread. A local nonprofit spotlighted her, and a regional magazine nominated her for a Rising Voice in Charity Award. But not everyone celebrated her rise. Tessa and Brent, simmering with jealousy, found an unlikely ally in Landon, the very same man who had tried to sabotage his own father. With charges dodged through a slick legal loophole, Landon still hovered around the edges of Halston Dynamics, pretending to care. The three of them hatched a plan to destroy Mira's credibility right on the eve of the charity gala where she would receive her award. Tessa crept into Mira's desk after hours and replaced her real donation receipts with forgeries showing large sums unaccounted for. Brent seeded whispers throughout the trainee pool, calling Mira a scammer in disguise. And Landon, he fed the story to a popular industry gossip blog, framing Mira as a corporate social climber running a fake charity. Mira sensed the shift before she could name it. Side glances, clipped conversations, a tension in the air that didn't belong. But she kept moving forward, believing that her work, her truth, would speak loudest in the end. She was wrong until Graham intervened. He had already been watching from afar. His private investigator, still on Landon's trail, caught a phone call. One Landon never expected anyone to hear. In it. Landon bragged about setting up the girl, laughing at how easy it had been to fake the paper trail. Graham summoned Mira to his office the next morning. His tone was calm, but his eyes were dark. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" he asked. Mira nodded slowly. Whispers. Looks. Something I can't prove. He placed a folder in front of her, the forged receipts, now flagged and catalogued. "Not yours." "Are they?" She shook her head, stunned. "I didn't think so," Graham said quietly. "I have the evidence." Landon's voice. "Brent and Tessa are complicit." Mira swallowed hard, a rush of gratitude rising in her throat. "Focus on the gala," he said. "I'll take care of the rest." And so she did. She returned to the library that night, sitting between dusty shelves with her laptop and a legal pad. She rebuilt her donation logs from scratch. She called every shelter, every school that had received help. She gathered signatures, testimonies, proof. At 2 a.m, she sat on her couch, the city glittering outside her window. Her laptop hummed softly beside her, still open to the keynote slides. She leaned her head back, eyes heavy. She thought of Graham, his unwavering voice, the warmth she wasn't sure she was allowed to feel. That night at the penthouse drifted through her thoughts. The way his shirt had hung off her shoulder. The way he had stayed. She told herself it was just gratitude, but her heart fluttered in a way she couldn't explain. Elsewhere. Graham sat in his office. The investigator's report spread across his desk like a quiet war plan. Landon's voice crackled through a speaker, arrogant and cold. Graham rubbed his temples. He thought of Mira, her bravery in the hotel lobby, her persistence at work, the fire behind her silence. She wasn't just a trainee. She wasn't just a name on paper. She was something else entirely. And she had gotten under his skin. That night, as the city buzzed quietly outside, Graham made a decision. He would not let them tear her down. Not this time. Mira drifted to sleep with the city lights dancing on her walls. In her dreams, she stood on a stage, speaking with confidence, the crowd listening. Graham stood in the back, watching not as her boss, but as something more. She had no idea that the night ahead would be more than just a turning point. It would be a reckoning. Her heart pounded beneath the borrowed navy gown, the satin cool against her skin. The ballroom at the Wellington Grand shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, every table draped in white linen and flickering candlelight. The air was thick with perfume, polite laughter, and the hum of clinking glasses. Mira stood just inside the doorway, taking it all in. The Charity Vanguard Gala, an evening that had once seemed impossibly far away, was now here, and she was among its honored guests. Her nomination as a rising figure in community work was more than an accolade. It was a beacon after long months of doubt, exhaustion, and grit. Around her, business leaders mingled with philanthropists, reporters took quiet notes, and champagne moved in waves. Mira smoothed the fabric at her waist and took a steadying breath. She didn't know a storm was quietly building. The first hour passed smoothly. She made her rounds, answering questions about her work with rural schools in southern Kentucky. She spoke of how coats and books made their way into the hands of children who had never owned either. Her voice carried a gentle pride, more warmth than ego. People listened. They nodded. A few even touched her arm, quietly thanking her for reminding them of what giving looked like. Then she saw Graham across the room. Sharp in a charcoal suit, his gaze found hers and held. He offered a subtle nod, not performative, just grounding. Something in that look stilled her nerves. She had grown used to his silence. It had become a kind of safety. When the MC took the stage, a smooth man in a velvet jacket, with the voice of a game show host, the crowd turned toward him in anticipation. He offered practiced jokes and brisk transitions, then began introducing the nominees. Mira sat near the front. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but a flicker of discomfort moved across her spine. 2 tables away sat Tessa Langley and Brent Callahan, their smiles brittle, their posture rigid. She felt their eyes, though their faces gave nothing away. She focused on the stage. Then her name was called. Applause rose like a wave, and she stood, her legs not quite steady beneath her. Her heels clicked across the polished floor. She reached the podium, accepted the glass award, and leaned toward the microphone. Her voice, though soft, held its ground. She thanked the organizers, spoke of the cause, of Halston dynamics, and the space it had given her to grow not just as an employee, but as a person. She was mid-sentence when it happened. A man's voice cracked through the quiet. Landon Halston stormed forward, his face flushed, his expression twisted by something darker than rage. "She's a fraud," he barked, pointing straight at her. "All of it lies. The charity, the money. She's been stealing from the start." Gasps scattered like shattered glass across the ballroom. Before Mira could even turn fully toward him, Tessa had climbed the stairs, heels echoing like accusation. In her hands, She held a sheaf of papers, falsified donation receipts. She pocketed the funds. Tessa declared, "We have the proof." Then Brent's voice added fuel to the fire. She played the sympathy card to climb the ladder. She's not who she says she is. Mira froze. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the podium. She opened her mouth, but the noise swallowed her. Landon stepped closer, accusing not only her, but Graham. They worked together, cooked the books. She's no better than he is. Cameras flashed. Pens flew. Reporters scribbled like they'd been waiting for the fall. Mira's chest ached. Her vision blurred. The fake receipts, the whispers, it all made sense now. She tried to speak, tried to explain, but Tessa's voice rose above hers, mocking. "How does someone with no degree afford jewelry like that?" she sneered, gesturing toward Mira's delicate hairpins. The room shifted. Doubt spread. Heads turned. And then Graham stepped onto the stage. The room stilled like a held breath. He took the microphone from Mira, gently, his hand brushing hers. His voice, when it came, was calm but cut like a blade. "You will listen," he said, "because enough is enough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. The ballroom filled with sound. Landon's voice, recorded and clear. "She has no idea. I switched the records myself. This'll take her down. One less obstacle." Silence fell again, this time stunned. Graham looked straight at Landon. "You set her up. And I have every minute of it on tape." He turned to the crowd, his voice unwavering. "Mira Collins is not a thief. She's the most principled person I've worked with in years. And she deserves better than this circus." Mira stared at him, her throat tight. Not just from the defense, but from the way he stood beside her, the way he didn't look away, the way, for the first time, it felt like the truth between them had nowhere left to hide. The audio crackled through the speakers. Unmistakable Landon's voice, laced with arrogance. She bought every second of it. The fake receipts, the setup, it's flawless. Gasps broke across the ballroom like wind through dry leaves. Heads snapped toward Landon. His smirk faded as the truth echoed. On stage, Graham didn't flinch. His voice remained composed, but his eyes were steel. "I've known for months," he said. "After what happened to my father, I started digging, and I found more than I expected." He turned to the MC, handing over a thick folder: emails, bank statements, transaction logs, every document detailing Mira's charity work, each donation accounted for. Then came the witnesses. A school principal from Whitley County, Kentucky, stepped forward first, her voice warm, unwavering. She spoke of winter boots that arrived when they were most needed, of books that turned silence into storytelling in classrooms. After her came a director from a shelter, then a volunteer from a mobile literacy project. Each one confirmed Mira's name, Mira's effort, Mira's truth. The crowd shifted. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then bold and rising like a tide. Mira stood near the podium, eyes glassy with disbelief, her breath short in her chest. Then Graham turned to her. He stepped closer, lowered the microphone, and said something only she could hear, though the room seemed to feel it. "She's not just my colleague, she's my wife." The air left the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, cameras blinking like frantic fireflies. Graham turned back to the crowd, voice low but steady. "A year ago, we signed a marriage contract to save the women who raised us. I didn't remember it at first, not until her name kept coming up, pulling at something I hadn't allowed myself to feel." He paused, looking at Mira again. "I fell for her, not as an employee, but as the woman who never stopped fighting, who never asked for anything but a chance." Landon lunged forward, shouting, his face twisted in rage. He's lying. It's all a setup. I'm the one who deserves everything this company. This legacy security stepped in as Graham lifted a hand. The investigator tied him not just to the forged documents, he said, calm even now, but to the attempt on my father's life. Landon thrashed as he was pulled back, curses bouncing off the walls. Tessa and Brent tried to slip away unnoticed, but Graham turned, naming them clearly. They were part of it too. Their actions are being reviewed by legal. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the three were escorted out Landon shouting apologies. Brent, pale as chalk. Tessa's lips pressed into a bitter line. When the stage quieted, Graham handed the microphone to Mira. Their fingers brushed. She drew a slow breath, then turned to the audience. She spoke not with anger, but clarity. I came here tonight carrying months of silence, of doubt. I was told people like me don't belong in rooms like this. But I do. And I will. She paused, eyes finding Graham's. And this man believed in me when it could have cost him everything. I'm not the star of this night. He is, because despite everything, he never let the darkness win. Applause burst, wave after wave. Mira stood tall, the award glinting in her hand, the noise surrounding her like wind through light. Later, as the gala thinned and the music softened, Graham found her near the back of the ballroom. He took her hand, pulling her toward a quiet corner. Every word I said, I meant it, he whispered. I don't want the paper version of this marriage. I want the real thing. Mira stared at him. The room blurred, but his face, the honesty in his eyes remained sharp. She remembered the night he drove her home, the shirt, the silence, the way he never crossed the line. I feel it too, she said, voice no louder than a heartbeat. A rare smile broke across Graham's face, open and warm. He wrapped his arms around her. The crowd disappeared. The cameras vanished. But the flashbulbs still came. Journalists surged, questions flying like arrows. Graham held steady, arm around her waist. We started as strangers, he told them. But somewhere along the way, something real found us. He turned to her. Stay with me. Let's make it more than a contract. Mira looked up, her eyes shining. Yes, she said simply. Surely. And as the cameras lit up around them, as applause rose again, Mira didn't see the flash or the crowd, only him, his face, and a promise that, for the first time, didn't feel borrowed. It felt like home. They left the gala side by side, stepping into the cool night air of Hartford, the city alive with golden street lamps and distant laughter. Mira clutched her award in one hand, Graham's fingers interlaced with hers in the other. The weight she had carried for so long, the doubt, the whispers, the quiet ache of not belonging seemed to lift with every step. Landon, Tessa, and Brent were gone now, their deceit exposed and dismantled. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Mira felt something close to steady. With Graham beside her, she didn't feel like she was chasing a place in the world anymore. She was already walking through it. Weeks later, she stood in the soft glow of Henrietta Halston's brownstone, a warm, ivy-covered home tucked just outside the city's bustling center. The windows flickered with candlelight, and the smell of vanilla and cinnamon floated through the air. It was Graham's birthday, a quiet dinner Henrietta insisted on hosting. No suits, no fanfare, just family. Mira adjusted the gift bag in her hand, her heart fluttering. Since the night of the gala, everything between her and Graham had shifted. The paper marriage had turned real slowly, quietly, beautifully. This dinner felt like a beginning. Henrietta bustled about in the kitchen, her silver hair catching the light as she moved with practiced ease. She welcomed Mira like a daughter, her no-nonsense manner softened by genuine affection. "I told him no work emails tonight," she said loudly over her shoulder. "He has to be human for one evening." Graham appeared in the hallway, his signature suit traded for a soft navy sweater, his hair slightly tousled. He smiled when he saw Mira, not the polite corporate kind, but something warmer, something just for her. Mira smiled back, her chest tightening in that sweet, familiar way. The night unfolded gently. Henrietta pulled out old photo albums, pages filled with snapshots of a younger Graham, gap-toothed grins, muddy sneakers, and one particularly ridiculous picture of him clutching a half-built spaceship made of plastic bricks. Mira laughed aloud. "You were such a nerd." "I still am," Graham admitted, his grin sheepish. He told her how he used to stay up building cities out of colored blocks. "Guess I never outgrew trying to piece things together." Mira held on to that thought, glad her gift would make sense. Henrietta watched them from across the table, her smile wide and knowing. "You two make a good match," she said simply. Mira flushed, her fingers brushing Graham's beneath the tablecloth. Dinner was simple roasted chicken, creamy potatoes, warm rolls, the kind of food that brought quiet comfort. Mira helped Henrietta clear the dishes afterward, and the older woman touched her arm gently. "I saw something in you. The moment I read that application," she said, "you have a light. And Graham, he needed that." Back in the living room, Graham sliced the birthday cake and handed Mira the first piece. Their fingers touched again, and the electricity of it wasn't new anymore, but it still made her heart beat faster. Then Mira handed him her gift, a plain brown box, wrapped with care. Graham raised an eyebrow, pulling the paper apart to reveal a Lego car set, sleek and intricate, with hundreds of pieces. His face lit up like a boy's. "How did you know?" Mira smiled. "Your childhood photos told me everything. Also, you work too much. You deserve a little play." He laughed, a full, unguarded sound she'd rarely heard. "You're right," he said, "and I'm keeping this one forever." He poured the pieces out onto the coffee table and looked at her, eyes twinkling. "Help me build it." She nodded, settling in beside him. They worked together in the quiet, fingers brushing, laughter spilling in between instructions and little mistakes. Piece by piece, they built something small, but it felt like the beginning of something big, not a contract, not a rescue mission, but a life. One neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted to keep. From her armchair, Henrietta Halston watched with a glimmer in her eyes. The soft light danced in her teacup as she smiled. "It's about time Graham had someone to share his quiet," she said, her voice gentle but full of meaning. "You bring light into this family. Mira." Mira blushed, her fingers working steadily as she clipped another Lego piece into place. The car was nearly done, sleek, black, and beautiful, a tiny monument to patience, teamwork, and something neither of them had expected to build. When they finished, Graham leaned back, his shoulder brushing hers. "Best birthday gift I've had in years," he murmured. The words were soft, but they struck deep. Mira's heart lifted. She had reached him, and not just through gestures or moments, but through something real. Later, as Graham fetched tea from the kitchen, Henrietta took Mira's hand and pressed a small bouquet into her palms. Roses and lilies, bound with a thin blue ribbon. "He ordered these for you that night," she whispered, "at the gala. Wanted to give them to his wife, but life happened." Mira stared at the flowers. Her breath caught. She touched the petals gently, as if afraid they might vanish. Henrietta winked. "You've always been the one." Mira looked across the room where Graham stood now, laughing softly at something his grandmother said. And for the first time, there was no hesitation, no questioning. This him, them, it was real. "I'll take good care of him," she said, voice thick with emotion. "I know," Henrietta replied, patting her hand. As the evening drew to a close, Henrietta shooed them toward the door. "Old ladies need sleep," she teased. Outside, the city air was crisp but kind. Graham offered to drive her home, but Mira shook her head. "Walk with me," she said, sliding her arm through his. They wandered through quiet streets, the city's pulse now a gentle hum around them. Lights blinked in high-rise windows, and the sky held the soft pink of distant clouds. "I've been thinking," Mira began, her voice steady. He glanced over. "About work." She paused, then continued. "I turned in my resignation this morning." Graham stopped walking. What he asked, not angry, but surprised. Why Mira searched for the right words. "Halston Dynamics gave me a ladder when I didn't even have the ground beneath me. I owe everything to that chance. To you. But I want to build something on my own now, something with my name on it." He was quiet, listening. She went on, more certain now. "I want to start something for kids, maybe a nonprofit. Books, coats, a little hope for kids like the ones we helped in Kentucky." A slow, proud smile formed on his face. "The company will miss you," he said. "But I think the world needs what you're about to do. I'll miss you most." They reached a quiet park. A fountain shimmered under the city lights, casting moving reflections across the sidewalk. Graham stopped, turned toward her. "I have one last thing," he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. "Their marriage license. The contract ends today. You're free, Mira, if you want to be." She stared at it, then at him. Her heart thudded in her chest. "I don't want to end it," she whispered. "I want it to begin." His expression cracked open into a wide, honest smile. He pulled her into his arms. She leaned into him, feeling the calm of his heartbeat beneath her hand. The world felt distant, the fountain, the street, the city, everything faded until only his voice remained. "I want forever," he whispered into her hair. She nodded. "Me too." He tilted her chin, his blue eyes searching. But this time, not for answers. Just to be sure she was still real. "I like you," he said, smiling crookedly. "Really like you. I'm glad the secret's out." Mira laughed, her voice soft as wind through trees. "I like you, too." Their kiss was unhurried, tender. It tasted of hope and lavender and second chances. When they reached her apartment, Mira unlocked the door. Graham didn't leave, and for the first time, he didn't need to ask if he could stay. They stepped onto her small balcony, the city of Hartford unfolding like a living painting beneath them. Lights shimmered across rooftops, soft as stars, and somewhere below, a train hummed through the night. Mira stood at the railing, the bouquet still cradled in her arms, roses and lilies gently brushing her wrist. Graham stood beside her, his arm wrapped loosely around her waist, his presence solid and warm against the cool evening air. She looked out over the city, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel distant or unreachable. It felt like home. She had come to this city with nothing but urgency and fear, a woman trying to save her mother with a signature and a silence she thought would swallow her. And now, standing here, she had something she never planned on. She had him. Graham leaned closer, his voice low near her ear. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Whatever's next, we'll do it together." Mira nodded, her fingers tightening slightly around the ribbon of the bouquet. "We will," she said, her voice steady, Sure. The night wrapped gently around them, calm and open, no crowds, no speeches, no flashbulbs or false smiles, just breath, just stillness, just them. Mira rested her head on his shoulder, eyes tracing the soft glow of the skyline. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove she belonged to a world that measured worth in degrees and titles. But here, now, she knew the truth. She didn't need to belong to anything else. She belonged to herself, to this city, to the man who stood beside her, and to a love that hadn't come with promises, but had grown from patience, from respect, from choosing each other again and again. Their story had begun in a quiet coffee shop, with a contract inked in desperation, but it had led here, to a balcony, to a night that held no need for words, a beginning disguised as an ending. Mira closed her eyes, the rhythm of his breathing beside her, the weight of his hand resting against her spine, the scent of flowers in her arms, and she smiled, because this was only the beginning. She had signed a contract to save her mother's life, but somewhere between legal pages and late-night conversations, between whispered truths and borrowed shirts, she found something far greater, a place to belong, a heart to call home, a love that chose her again and again. Mira and Graham's story began with distance, silence, and survival. It ended with honesty, tenderness, and the kind of love that grows slowly but stays. Because sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead us to the most beautiful endings, and sometimes what starts as a rescue becomes a reason to stay. If this story touched your heart, helped you believe a little more in second chances or quiet love, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that heal, connect, and inspire. Thank you for watching. And remember, love, even when unexpected, is never accidental.